Hare Krishna. Okay, starting with Chapter 8, Attaining the Supreme. Chapter 8, Text 1. Arjuna Uvacha. Kim tha brahma kim adhyatmam kim karma purushottama adi bhutam cha kim proktam adi daivam kim uchyate. Synonyms. Arjunaha Uvacha. Arjuna said, Kim, what? Tat, that. Brahma, Brahman. Kim, what? Adhyatmam, the self. Kim, what? Karma, fruit of activities. Purusha Uttama, O Supreme Person. Adibhutam, the material manifestation. Cha, and Kim, what? Proktam is called. Adidaivam, the demigods. Kim, what? Uchyate is called. Translation. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Purport. In this chapter, Lord Krishna answers different questions from Arjuna, beginning with, What is Brahman? The Lord also explains karma, fruitive activities, devotional service and yoga principles, and devotional service in its pure form. The Srimad Bhagavatam explains that the supreme absolute truth is known as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In addition, the living entity, the individual soul, is also called Brahman. Arjuna also inquires about Atma, which refers to body, soul, and mind. According to the Vedic dictionary, Atma refers to the mind, soul, body, and senses also. Arjuna has addressed the Supreme Lord as Purushottama, Supreme Person, which means that he was putting these questions not simply to a friend, but to the Supreme Person, knowing him to be the supreme authority able to give definitive answers. Chapter 8, Text 2. Adi yajnaha katam kocha dehismin madasudana prayanakali chakatam shinayosi niyatat mabahi. Adi yajnaha, the Lord of Sacrifice, katam, how, kaha, who, acha, here, dehe, in the body, asmin, this, madhusudana, O Madhusudana, prayanakali, at the time of death, cha, and katam, how, shinenyaha asi, you can be known, niyata atmaviyaha, by the self-controlled. Translation. Who is the Lord of Sacrifice, and how does he live in the body? O Madhusudana, and how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Purport. Lord of Sacrifice may refer to either Indra or Vishnu. Vishnu is the chief of the primal demigods, including Brahma and Shiva, and Indra is the chief of the administrative demigods. Both Indra and Vishnu are worshipped by yajna performances. But here, Arjuna asks who is actually the Lord of yajna, sacrifice, and how the Lord is residing within the body of the living entity. Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana because Krishna once killed a demon named Madhu. Actually, these questions, which are of the nature of doubts, should not have arisen in the mind of Arjuna because Arjuna is a Krishna-conscious devotee. Therefore, these doubts are like demons. Since Krishna is so expert in killing demons, Arjuna here addresses him as Madhusudana, so that Krishna might kill the demonic doubts that arise in Arjuna's mind. Now the word prayanakali in this verse is very significant because whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. Arjuna is very anxious to know of those who are constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness. What should be their position at that final moment? At that time of death, all the bodily functions are disrupted, and the mind is not in a proper condition. Thus disturbed by the bodily situation, one may not be able to remember the Supreme Lord. Maharaj Kuleshkara, a great devotee, prays, My dear Lord, just now I am quite healthy, and it is better that I die immediately, so that the swan of my mind can seek entrance at the stem of your lotus feet. The metaphor is used because the swan, a bird of the water, takes pleasure in digging into the lotus flowers. Its sporting proclivity is to enter the lotus flower. Maharaj Kuleshkara says to the Lord, Now my mind is undisturbed, and I am quite healthy. If I die immediately thinking of your lotus feet, then I am sure that my performance of your devotional service will become perfect. But if I have to wait for my natural death, then I do not know what will happen, because at that time the bodily functions will be disrupted, my throat will be choked up, and I do not know whether I shall be able to chant your name. Better let me die immediately. Arjuna questions how a person can fix his mind on Krishna's lotus feet at such a time. Chapter 8, Text 3. Sri Bhagavan Yuvacha. Aksharam Brahma Paramam Svabhavo Vidyatmam Uchyate Bhutha Bhavo Karo Sarga Karma Samjitaha. Synonyms. Sri Bhagavan Yuvacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said, Aksharam, indestructible, Brahma, Brahman, Paramam, transcendental, Svabhavaha, eternal nature, Adhyatmam, the self, Uchyate is called, Bhuta Bhava Udbhava Karaha, producing the material bodies of the living entities, Visargaha, creation, Karma, fruitive activities, Samjnitaha is called. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, The indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruit of activities. Purport: Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman there is Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter, but in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Para-Brahman. The living entity, Jivatma, takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies himself with matter, and sometimes he identifies himself with the superior spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 8,400,000 species of life, but in spiritual nature, he has only one body. In material nature, he is manifested sometimes as a man, demigod, animal, beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifices, or yajna, but when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. This process is called karma. The Chandrogaya Upanishad describes the Vedic sacrificial process. On the sacrificial altar, 5 kinds of offerings are made into 5 kinds of fire. The 5 kinds of fire are conceived of as the heavenly planets, clouds, the earth, man and woman, and the 5 kinds of sacrificial offerings are faith, the enjoyer on the moon, rain, grains, and semen. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice, and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna-conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. Impersonalist commentators on the Bhagavad Gita unreasonably assume that Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world, and to substantiate this they refer to chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But in this verse, the Lord also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the Supreme Lord, Achyuta, never falls down. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahman assumes the form of Jiva is not acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman, the living entity, is distinguished from Para-Brahman, the Supreme Lord. Chapter 8, Text 4. Adibhutam Sharobhavaha Purushas Chadadevatam Adyajno Yamevatra Dehe Dehe Britam Vara. Adibhutam, the physical manifestation. Sharaha, constantly changing. Bhavaha, nature. Purushaha, the universal form, including all the demigods, like the sun and moon. Cha, and. Adidaivatam, called Adidaiva. Adiyajnaha, the supersoul. Aham, I, Krishna. Eva, certainly. Acha, in this. Dehe, body. Deha Britam, of the embodied. Vara, O best. Translation: O best of the embodied beings, the physical nature which is constantly changing is called Adibhuta, the material manifestation. The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods like those of the sun and moon, is called Adidaiva, and I, the Supreme Lord, represented as the super soul in the heart of every embodied being, am called Adiyajna, the Lord of sacrifice. Purport: the physical nature is constantly changing. Material bodies generally pass through 6 stages. They are born, they grow, they remain for some duration, they produce some byproducts, they dwindle, and then they vanish. This physical nature is called Adibhuta. It is created at a certain point and will be annihilated at a certain point. The conception of the universal form of the Supreme Lord, which includes all the demigods and their different planets, is called Adidaivata. And present in the body, along with the individual soul, is the Supersoul, a plenary representation of Lord Krishna. The Supersoul is called the Paramatma, or Adiyajna, and is situated in the heart. The word Eva is particularly important in the context of this verse, because by this word the Lord stresses that the Paramatma is not different from him. The Supersoul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, seated beside the individual soul, is the witness of the individual soul's activities, and is the source of the soul's various types of consciousness. The Supersoul gives the individual soul an opportunity to act freely and witness his activities. The functions of all these different manifestations of the Supreme Lord automatically become clarified for the pure Krishna-conscious devotee engaged in transcendental service to the Lord. The gigantic universal form of the Lord, called Adi Daivata, is contemplated by the neophyte who cannot approach the Supreme Lord in his manifestation as Supersoul. The neophyte is advised to contemplate the universal form, or Virat Purusha, whose legs are considered the lower planets, whose eyes are considered the sun and the moon, and whose head is considered the upper planetary system. Last verse for today, Chapter 8, Text 5. Antakali chamameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaha prayate samadbhavam yatinasti acha samsahayaha. Antakali, at the end of life. Cha, also. Mam, me. Eva, certainly. Smaran, remembering. Muktva, quitting. Kalivaram, the body. Yaha, he who. Prayate, goes. Saha, he. Mat bhava, my nature. Yati, achieves. Na, not. Asti, there is. Acha, here. Samsayaha, doubt. Translation. And whoever, at the end of his life, quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Purport. In this verse, the importance of Krishna consciousness is stressed. Anyone who quits his body in Krishna consciousness is at once transferred to the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord is the purest of the pure. Therefore, anyone who is constantly Krishna conscious is also the purest of the pure. The word smaran, remembering, is important. Remembrance of Krishna is not possible for the impure soul who has not practiced Krishna consciousness in devotional service. Therefore, one should practice Krishna consciousness from the very beginning of life. If one wants to achieve success at the end of his life, the process of remembering Krishna is essential. Therefore, one should constantly and incessantly chant the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Lord Chaitanya has advised that one be as tolerant as a tree, Taror Eva Sahishnuna. There may be so many impediments for a person who is chanting Hare Krishna. Nonetheless, tolerating all these impediments, one should continue to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, so that at the end of one's life, one can have the full benefit of Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna.